Good morning, everyone. Hello, welcome. I'll ask everyone to wrap up their conversations and have a seat. Finish grabbing your pastries and some coffee, and everyone shuffle in. Thank you, thank you. All right. We still have plenty of seats up here. If people are looking for extra seats, there's definitely more to go around, so find some new friends at a new table. All right, we're going to kick things off. And good morning again. My name is Marielle Cowden, and I'm the Director of Communications at the Colorado River District. On behalf of our External Affairs team and all our staff and board at the River District, I want to welcome you to the 2022 Annual Water Seminar. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge that here in Western Colorado and here in Grand Junction and here at Colorado Mesa University, we're on ancestral Ute homelands. And as we move forward in today's program, and as we hear from our tribal partners in one of our later panels, please just hold on to this knowledge. We'd appreciate that. I'd also like to thank Colorado Mesa University for hosting us throughout the day, and to all of you for being here, both in person and on our online virtual audience as well. A little housekeeping, just please make sure your cell phones are silenced throughout the day. If you have to take any important calls, we have the terrace out to the side for you to take those calls. That will also be where we're doing our happy hour at the end of the day, so please stick around for that. It's going to be really great. And now, without further ado, we're excited to kick off our agenda by welcoming the president of the board of the Colorado River District, Marty Whitmore. Please welcome Marty.
Good morning, and thank you so much for being here today. We welcome everyone who's here in person, as well as everyone who's participating virtually. This is a wonderful program that we have lined up for you today, and on behalf of the Board of Directors of the River District, we're excited and grateful that you all are interested and wanting to get more information about what's happening on the Colorado River. The river that's so important to everybody in the state of Colorado and beyond. We have lots of interesting challenges ahead of us on the Colorado River as water users. There are no easy solutions. If there were, we'd already have found them. It's really important that as we move forward to address our challenges, that we make sure we have all the facts, that we spend time considering carefully the potential implications and ramifications and try to avoid unintended consequences. But we have some panelists today who are going to have some great thoughts on various aspects of our challenges. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to our General Manager, Andy Mueller, or not. Sorry, Brendan. Great.
Thank you, Marty. And before Brendan comes on the stage, I just wanted to give a quick introduction to those of you who might be new to the River District and new to this community. A little bit of background. So Brendan is one of our wonderful staff members. He's part of our technical and engineering team. And just for those of you who are new, again, the Colorado River District, we're local government. We were founded in 1937 when the Front Range began to pull Colorado River water to fuel its growth. And no voice had yet existed for West Slope water and West Slope water users. So for 80 years since, we've worked to protect the water interests of Western Colorado. We work to keep water flowing west. We work to manage, conserve, develop, and protect West Slope water on behalf of the state of Colorado and all water users across our 15 counties, from Ouray to Summit to Rio Blanco. And we do all of this through legal and legislative advocacy, through outreach and education, and through our community funding partnership. And then now we're going to hear from Brendan Langenhausen, who's part of our technical and engineering support, which is a very key part of what we do at the River District. And October 1st will mark the beginning of a new water year, so to walk us through the hydrology of our most recent water year and set a foundation for the rest of today's presentations, please welcome Brendan Langenhausen, our Director of Technical Advocacy.
Good morning. I almost got a promotion there. That was awesome. No, I'm grateful not to have that position. But good morning and happy Water New Year to all of you. We are going to just reflect a little bit on the last year, what happened, and look into a little bit of what's forecasted into the next year. We're gonna just do a real quick recap of what we saw here in Colorado, in Western Colorado. Are those slides up? Because I have some good ones I want you guys to see. So, just a real recap of what we're gonna talk about the state. Our snowpack was meh, okay. We had some high temperatures. I don't know if you guys can read those, but. And a really good monsoon season to finish us off. And if she can bring some rain like that, I think we all need to start practicing that dance. So diving into the snowpack. We had kind of a unique year. It was really dry at the beginning, and as you can see through all three of these basins, these are the three major basins within our district, the Yampa White and the Snake Basin, the Colorado, and then the Gunnison. But they were all really similar, which is unique in itself. But just in general, we started off really dry, trending towards the driest kind of snowpack that we've had. And then this amazing December came around, December 9th through January 9th. Just the systems kept coming and pushed us all the way above average for snowpack. And then it led to another drought of snow. So then the snow just stopped, the faucet was turned off, and we, the skiing, all the skiers got a little bored with the snow. And then that lasted all the way through most of February. And then after that, we started to get some snow again, and it turned out to be an average to below average year. You can see some of those percentages ranged from 84 to 90% of average throughout our district. And then this correlated to runoff. So these are the gauges at the lower end of each of those basins. And this is just the runoff from April through July is being shown, which is the key period of runoff. And you could see that we had between 64% to 80% of average runoff during that time period for across these basins. And what I wanted to show here is just the loss that we have between our snowpack and our runoff, so that runoff efficiencies. And this is a trend that we've been seeing the last couple of years, where we get an average or maybe slightly below average, but our stream flows are well below average. And that was definitely the case this year. Why did that happen? We were still working on that a little bit, but the common themes that we're seeing are dry soils. This map on the left is the soil conditions in November of 2021, so last year. And this was the antecedent conditions going into the winter. And you see these dry soils just ready to soak up all the moisture from the snow, which leads to less runoff into the rivers, which has been a common theme through the last couple of years. We also see these warmer temperatures. So this is a plot of the last 12 months ending in August. And for that time period, that was the 6th warmest in the last century for the state of Colorado. And so just showing we're having these conditions, and that this is not uncommon. So just looking at temperature, this is a temperature plot. This is from the Colorado Climate Center. And this shows the Colorado River Basin in the state of Colorado trending the average temperatures through the water year. And so you can see that it's getting warmer, but particularly since the 1980s, that trend is becoming a lot more defined and trending higher, trending warmer. Oh yeah, I had that fun graphic. All right. But 2022 wasn't all bad. We did have some really good monsoons, and those really started to show up in May, particularly in the northwest corner of our state. And then in June, they came in up from the south and really hit the south. And in July and August, the whole west slope of Colorado really got hit well. And that's something that we haven't seen in the last couple of years. So this was something kind of unique for 2022, was these monsoons. Nice, consistent monsoons that came in that didn't lead to massive debris flows and the post-fire debris flows that kept the interstate open, thankfully, for those of us that live along the I-70 corridor. And so really good, just consistent moisture for us. And I didn't show September, but September maybe not be as great as what July and August have shown, but the last couple days are certainly helpful. And so where does that leave us in general, looking back at 2022? This is a quadrant map that the Colorado Climate Center puts out that is really helpful in kind of showing and comparing different years. And 2022 ends up right along, right on almost average precip. So the year in total, our precip for the total water year is really close to normal, and our temperatures are higher than normal. And so we end up in the warm and dry quadrant. And so I should explain this a little more. You have average temps on your y-axis on the left, and your precip is along the x-axis on the bottom. And this is kind of where we've been the last couple of years. So this is 2018 was up here, 2020, and 2021. And so we're falling right in line again. So the last, looking back, the last 4 out of 5 years, we've really been in this quadrant and have kind of set the conditions that we are seeing and experiencing today. Drought still does persist. The map on the left is from a year ago, and the one on the right is the most recent one from September 8th. And I kind of have to zoom in on Colorado for the moment, but you can see that there were extreme droughts in western Colorado, kind of extreme and severe, and those have kind of subsided to more moderate droughts. Now we're still in a drought, there's still dry conditions, I want to stress that, but it has improved, and I think a lot of that has been in part to those monsoons. If you zoom out and you look at the bigger basin, this is a good opportunity to kind of take a look there real quick. The same pattern kind of exists. A lot of those extreme drought areas have subsided. Not gone away, but they've certainly gotten a little better. So looking for our seasonal outlook, warmer outlook across Colorado. We have a nice bullseye right on top of us. So above average chances for warmer temperatures. We have below chances for normal precip. Another bullseye right on top of us. You know, sometimes it's good to hit the bullseye. I think in these cases, maybe not so much. And the other unique aspect looking forward is that we're heading into the third La Nina in a row. Some people are terming this as a triple dip. So we'll see. I've heard some meteorologists say that when the 3 La Ninas come, then one of them can be a really big year. So maybe this next year. But I don't know how much science is really behind that. All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and go and look at the bigger Colorado River Basin and focus in on Lake Powell for a moment. Lake Powell, the April through July inflow was 59% of average, pretty low. You can see in the chart how that compares to 2022 is in the lime green, and you can see how it compares to the last couple of years. Again, we're falling below average inflows, historical average inflows. For the water year in total, the projection total inflows are going to be just under 6 million acre feet. Total releases have to date, I guess, have been 6.64 million acre feet, and the total loss from the reservoir about 1.4 million acre feet over the year. This is equated to a loss of storage elevation at Lake Powell of 18.27 feet in this last water year, and the reservoir is about 24% full. So I know there's been a lot of news. Lake Powell has been in the news a lot this last year, but trying to pull some of that context into what's happened over this last year and what does that mean for us. Also, I wanted to kind of take a step back, get out of 2022 and even go back into 2021, just for a moment to catch us up on some of the administrative actions that have happened on the Big River. I know Andy will dive into this a little bit more in a minute, but just wanted to highlight a few of the major actions that have happened. So 2021 was the first year that they initiated the Drought Response Operations Agreement, which allowed for them to release 36,000 acre-feet out of Blue Mesa Reservoir and of 125,000 acre-feet out of Flaming Gorge Reservoir. And that was again issued in 2022. The DROA, or the Drought Response Operations Agreement, occurred again, or was initiated again, with Flaming Gorge releasing 500,000 acre-feet. And Lake Powell, they kept just under 500,000 acre-feet in Lake Powell in order to boost those reservoir levels out of risk of reaching the minimum power pool. So those levels in Powell are dropping such that they're threatening the operations, outlet operations. And so the other occurrence in 2022 was in the lower basin. They had tier 1 shortages declared. And so this was the first time in the lower basin where the shortages were enacted, and you could see who hit some of those reductions. Oh, whoops. And the last thing that really occurred maybe not the last thing, but the other major event was this challenge from the Secretary of the Interior to all Colorado River water users to conserve and voluntarily conserve 2 to 4 million acre-feet. And this was issued in June. It was 60 days to kind of look at what they can conserve. And this 2 to 4 million acre-feet really resonated with us. This is something that we found in our modeling of the imbalance of the system. And was a strong challenge sent out to the river users. The 60-day challenge ended in August. The Upper Colorado River Commission submitted a 5-point letter of actions that they can take. The lower basin couldn't reach consensus and didn't really submit much as far as their response to that. Reclamation continues to look into actions that they can take to address this imbalance of the 2 to 4 million acre-feet. So looking forward in 2023, some of the operations, administrative operations, the Bureau has declared the 7 million acre-feet release from Lake Powell this next year, which is lower than average. They've also declared a tier 2A shortage in the lower basin, again, adding more reductions from those lower basin states to kind of address the continually declining inflows. But all of those administrative actions, you can see here that they don't fully address the situation. They're not pulling us out of the risk. That risk still persists. It continues at Lake Powell as forecasted by the Bureau. This is the 24-month projections from the Bureau of Reclamation. And you can see in the most probable scenario, that green line in the middle, that we are likely to be in the same position that we are next year. So despite all these actions, we're going to still be there. And I think I'm going to kind of summarize it here, but what I really want to point out is the hydrology coming into Lake Powell. The last 4 out of 5 years, we've had 3 big years where the inflows just have not been what we've seen historically. They're not consistent, and that we are not addressing those in the way that we operate our systems. And so these administrative actions are good steps. They're needed, but they're just not enough to keep us ahead of where we need to go. And so this climate of warming and drying trends is likely to persist. We're seeing this. This year is setting up just like 2020 did and 2021. So we're going into kind of a similar year. I'm hopeful that this next year will bring a lot of ingenuity and realization of the continuance of this change. And I'm also, though, keeping my fingers crossed for a really big snow year. Maybe this triple dip will bring some new and needed moisture and a really good snowpack to us. And I might even be practicing that rain dance. So maybe you guys can join me. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that great overview, Brendan. And as we move into our morning keynote, I'm just going to do a quick Zoom share really fast. Apologies. As we move into our morning keynote, I just want to remind everyone about a very important part of the River District's mission, and the second part of our mission, which is to safeguard all the waters of the Colorado River to which the state of Colorado is entitled. And this means the River District is actively involved in big river interstate issues that we're hearing so much about today, as Brendan referenced. And we're supporting the state with the most up-to-date data and modeling to help Colorado and the Upper Basin better advocate for the water that we here are so intimately connected to. And as we recognize the 100th anniversary of the Colorado River Compact, I can't think of a better person to break down these important and complex Colorado River Basin issues than the River District's own General Manager, Andy Mueller. Please welcome Andy.
Well, thank you, Mariel. I definitely appreciate that. And I want to thank everybody for being here. It is really nice to be back in full swing. Understand the coronavirus is not gone, but that we've all learned how to live with it. And really appreciate that. I think it's nice to see people and be able to talk to you in person. I want to just thank our board and our staff for the opportunity to have this event. And if I could just ask those of our board members to stand up. We are governed by a board of 15. I just want people to see our board members who are here. Feel free to reach out to them. They're really wonderful people. Our statute says that for all of their hard work, they get paid $100 at our meetings, and that's it. So they spend hours and hours and hours of work helping us out and representing us in your local communities. So please feel free to reach out to them if at any time, and just really appreciate their work and support for our staff. Our staff today is on full time. We have 22 staff members, one of the smaller governmental entities in the state, and we aim to keep it that way because we have lots of important work to do getting our funds out to help our water users. But our staff works really hard. They are the antithesis to I would say the stereotype of government employees. They work oftentimes 18, 20 hours a day. They are traveling throughout the basin, in the interstate world, throughout the state, and certainly throughout the district. So they do great work, and what's really nice is that they're all smarter than me, so I get to rest on all their work and their brain power. I want to just talk about the compact, right? It's 100 years since we signed a compact. And when I say we, what that means is the 7 states each had a representative in the federal government. That's who was at the table, right? So you've probably seen in the news, including some of our presentations, the picture of the folks who are my age and older, old white men, agreeing to divide up the river. And they did, it was a product of the times in which it was drafted, but it left a lot of people out, and it made some other errors. There are calls today, given the state of the reservoirs that Brendan just covered, that there are calls today for throwing that document out, throwing the agreement out, starting fresh with something new. And I'd like to talk about the fact that the compact is a living document. It is the basis of the law of the river. It has adapted, our governance structure around the river has adapted since 1922. And the compact was written in a way that allows it to be adapted. It's interesting because it was written by a bunch of lawyers. And generally, when lawyers write documents, what they say they strive for is preciseness, clarity, clear and certainty. The compact is a short document. It's maybe 8 pages long, depending on what size font you print it out in. It is incredibly simple at its essence. today, if you think about it, our state legislature, and I apologize to any legislators in the room, they want to make a law that says, you know, you can only cross a street going from east to west, not west to east. Well, it would take any one of our state's legislatures in our country probably 16 pages to make a law that said that, right? Because of all the whereas, what fors, and details they'd feel the need to stick into it. This compact is why it's so important. It's short, but it allows us to interpret it and apply it to today's situation and bend it to meet the values of today. So I want to talk about that and talk about what it means. But I want to acknowledge that the river is in fact in crisis, and we're dealing with two different issues right now in the river simultaneously. So it's the immediate hydrologic shortage in the reservoir system that Brendan talked about, and it is, in addition to that, there are operating guidelines that operate the major reservoirs that are federally owned on the system. Those guidelines are in place right now and set to expire in 2026. So the states and water policy folks like myself and the federal government are engaged in discussions both about how you deal with this crisis, but also how you deal with an operating guidelines that might be able to be more flexible and handle and anticipate what's actually happening on the river. So why do we have a compact, and what's the essence of that compact? I think the key is that if you think back to 1922, we had a situation in our state, the birthplace of the prior appropriation doctrine, right? So we hold sacrosanct, or many of the water users in our state hold sacrosanct, that prior appropriation doctrine, first in time, first in right. But our state looked downriver in the big river and saw something happening that was very disconcerting, and that was the development in California, Southern California, and realized that the first in time, first in right doctrine was not actually going to be to our advantage on an interstate level. Because if we can look at it, what was going on is this was happening in 1922 in California, and this is probably more what Colorado looked like in general at the time, right? So we said, and it was an attorney from the Weld County, Greeley, who said, look, let's go talk up to the other states about an equitable apportionment. And I find it interesting, the word equitable can be a politically charged word these days, right? There's a lot of disenfranchised folks saying our governance systems in the river are not equitable, are not fair. Well, I think that's true. And I think there are also situations going back in time where you look and here these folks were trying to establish their own meaning of what is equitable in the river. And so they got together and they said, well, what does this equity mean? And if I can get my iPad to work, I will. Just wanted to read the, let's see if I can find it here. Well, I won't read it. I'm going to end up paraphrasing it. The essence of the compact, I think, is contained in Article 1. And Article 1 basically says that the states are sitting down to equitably apportion the river. And it's really clear, and they say, and we're going to do that in order to avoid or encourage comity among the states and avoid future conflicts. And that seems pretty funny today, given all the conflicts and finger pointing going on the river. But the essence was to create a structure under which we could work together and figure out what was fair. What is fair? What was fair back then was a 50-50 split of the river. The lower basin got 7.5 million acre feet, and the upper basin got 7.5 million acre feet. Our lower basin will point out, hey, wait, the same article, Article 3 in the compact says that there's another million acre feet to the lower basin. I think it's pretty clear from the documents created at the time, the minutes and the meetings, that was to address the lower basin tributary use in the river. So tributaries that originate in the lower basin, they got another 1 million acre feet out of those. But the main stem of the river was a 50-50 split, right? Their big mistake back then was that they used hard numbers. They used the 7.5, 7.5 split. But the essence makes sense. We're going to split this river in a fair manner, right? Now, it was not an inclusionary process, so those 7 sovereign states and the federal sovereign government left out 30 sovereign tribes in that discussion. Today, our federal government and our states have the obligation to bring those 30 sovereign tribes into the discussion and work with them to figure out how that equitable apportionment continues to work, right? And I would say that our states, in particular, you'll hear from our New Mexico commissioner and our Colorado commissioner today with a few tribal representatives talking about what that might look like in the future and why that's important. But remember, 50-50 was the split. So talked about leaving people out. There were other mistakes. We didn't follow the best available science. There was several hydrological engineers back in 1922 that said, there is no way there's as much water as you're dividing. Because there was that 16.5 or 16 million acre feet that we divided between the states, including the extra million to the lower basin. But it also said, oh, and we know there's going to be a treaty with Mexico, so whatever that treaty says, that's part of it. Well, that turned out to be another 1.5 million acre feet. So that's 17.5 million acre feet divided up between the states. Well, that river hasn't flown in its 100 years. It's just below a 15 million acre foot river. So it really never reached it, that expectation. There was even a provision in the compact that said, oh yeah, and we'll meet back here in a few decades, and we're going to divide up the surplus, some more surplus. So that second meeting never happened because they realized it wasn't occurring. So keep that in mind as we talk about this today and what's happening and how to adapt that compact. So in the upper basin, the states got together and said, let's figure out our own compact and figure out how we're going to divide up our 7.5 million. And by 1948, those states signed a compact with the federal government, and it divided up the river, their share of the river, by percentages. What a novel idea, right? The state of Colorado got 51.75% of whatever water the upper basin was entitled to. So there was some evolution there within the law of the river that it was clear we actually have to think about percentages. And I want you to remember that. Like that thought in 1948 is a really good blueprint for how we adapt to what we're dealing with today. We often get stuck on these hard numbers, and I think we've really got to look at it in terms of percentages as we go forward. If I could, so I can't see the slides. There we go. It turned back on. Sorry. When that happens. So I want to talk about how I could sit up here all day, but my staff would get really upset and you'd get bored. And talk about all the different evolutions in the law of the river over time. I picked a few just to talk about them, to talk about the theme of how we do it right and where we've done it wrong when we haven't listened to good science. This image on the screen is the Central Arizona Project. And I'm not going to pick just on the Central Arizona Project, but in 1968, all 7 states convinced the rest of Congress and the President of the United States that it was a great idea to enact a law that authorized the construction of the Central Arizona Project and a whole series of projects in the upper basin, including many here in western Colorado. And in that act, it's really an interesting piece of writing. There was a recognition that when those projects were built out, the river system would be a minimum of 2.5 million acre feet short. They knew at the time they authorized the construction of those projects and funded the construction that there wasn't enough water in the system, but they did it anyway. And why did they do it? Because there was a dream, some people still have, that we're going to import a ton of water into the Colorado River Basin, right? Back then, it was 2.5 million acre feet. Today, if you listen to folks, it's 2 to 4 million acre feet that we should take from another source of water. Back then, and I can tell you, I was just digging around in our district's library, found the original plans for what they called the Snake River Project. And it was dated in 1964. And it was a map showing a pipeline from the Snake River in the Columbian Basin all the way down to Lake Mead, right? And that's where they were going to get this water. That's what they were thinking. They were also thinking, gee, we're going to go get a pipeline out to the Great Lakes, Missouri River. It's starting to sound familiar to some of you, right? We're still talking about those projects. 1968 was kind of the end of that big Bureau of Reclamation dam building era, project era. It was the beginning of the environmental movement in the federal legislative world. There was a recognition, a change in values that recognized that constructing our way through these natural river systems is actually not a long-term sustainable plan for human and global survival, and that we needed to actually prop up our natural environment instead of reconstruct it. And so in '68, it seemed reasonable to import that water. Today, I know that some people still think it's reasonable. I would personally, and this is just my own perspective, not that of the district or the state of Colorado, clearly, I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's reasonable. I don't think we're going to do it. In fact, back in '68, in order to get the rest of Congress to agree to this act, the original version said that we were going to go right out, study importation, and enact the importation construction projects. That's the original one. The final one that was approved by senators in the U.S. Senate, including those from the Midwest and the Pacific Northwest, said that there will be studies done for importing water, but they're not going to start for 10 years. No one's allowed to fund those studies for 10 years. Why is that? Because the Great Lakes states went out during those 10 years and signed a compact that prevented anybody from exporting water out of the Great Lakes Basin. They said, that compact thing sounds pretty good. We're going to get one of our own. And we're going to stop you guys from taking our water. Columbia River Basin feels the same way. So, by the way, today, just for those who are in favor of the Missouri pipeline, I guarantee you the folks along that river feel the same way about us exporting their water. So that was our thought back then. I want to just turn to the next item. And, you know, we are experiencing an incredible change in use in our basin, right? We're seeing our agricultural land developed into residential subdivisions, and the question is, can we sustain our local food supply and our systems, right? And so I think, you know, and I'm just sorry, I'm trying to find my notes on this. If we can. Well, I just want to say that that evolution of the river continues. We're continuing to see changes, and what we've seen, and I can touch on this, is that projects that were built in the late 50s and the 60s, and since then, all agreed to a couple of things. One, many of them agreed that they were junior in status in order to get the federal government funding. They said, yes, we're junior, and when the water gets tight, we'll turn it off. Others in the system, when they were built, agreed that they were, quote, supplemental irrigation water. Well, what's happened in both of those situations, both in the lower basin and the upper basin, in those types of situations, is that we've gone from ag, which can be somewhat flexible in terms of its demands during drought periods, and we've turned it into subdivisions and homes. And what was a supplemental supply, and I'll just for a minute pick on the Colorado Big Thompson project, taking water out of the headwaters of the Colorado and bringing it over into northeastern Colorado. That project was 90% owned by agriculture when it came online. Today, it's 75% owned by municipalities. Much of that water still gets leased back to ag, but the idea is it's going to fuel all of the growth, continue to fuel the growth out there. It's hardening the demand. That water right in the Colorado Big Thompson is junior to the compact. It was junior when it was created. It was agreed by the proponents of that project that it would suffer the consequences of being junior. Today, the idea of turning water off on all those houses and cities that have grown up on that water seems untenable to most people. The Central Arizona project in the lower basin. In order to build it, Arizona said, yes, it's junior. It's junior to California, it's junior to Nevada. But then they went and built the exponential growth in Phoenix, Scottsdale, Tucson, and it depends on that water. And they're saying, well, junior doesn't really mean junior. It's different. And I think that it's really important to understand that. We've got a problem. We've allowed development to occur based on an unreliable water supply, and we're going to have to adapt to that in a way that makes it possible to succeed as a society. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to move out of Phoenix or everybody needs to stop moving into northeastern Colorado. But what it means is we've got to find a way to deal with that water shortage that doesn't decimate the other important water uses in the Colorado River. That includes, and I would point especially to agriculture and industry. We need local food. I want to just thank our Rogers Mesa apple providers here. These are local apples here. We have to have local food. We have to have that in order to survive. And the idea that we can just export all of our food production is crazy. So we've got to make sure that our growth is handled correctly. And I think the compact can let us do that. We're going to keep moving along. There are a couple other things that we're finding out that we're not doing a great job of, and it's our modeling on the river. This is a model that I think a graph that Brendan just showed us, and that green line is supposed to be the most probable, right? But what we found over the last 5 years is that the red line is actually more probable. All those little shady gray lines on the map, and by the way, I don't do graphs very well, so as a lawyer, I have a hard time with them. Those gray lines are individual runs of models, right? So those individual runs of those models are supposed to be various possible future scenarios. And what we found over the last 5 years consistently is that the red line is about where we're turning out. It's supposed to be the minimum 10% possibility. Well, it really is turning out to be the most probable. And so why is that? It's because we've based our modeling on the last 30 years, and we haven't taken into account what Brendan was talking about, which is the sharp rise in temperatures over the last 10 years. And so that temperature relationship to water availability in the Colorado River is huge, and our modeling is using this historic period that is far too big. The head modeler at the Bureau of Reclamation, Jim Prairie, is pushing the idea that we've got to pay attention to the lowest probabilities on these maps. They are looking at different ways to model the short term and the history and understand it, but it's really important that we do that. This is Lake Mead, same thing, right? And when you follow those minimum probable lines and you think about them being the most probable lines, every critical point in those elevations is going to be passed. We're going to understand that those reservoirs easily could hit dead pool. First, they're going to lose power, and then they're going to hit dead pool if we continue in the way we're operating now. If we don't reduce our demands, we're going to see those reservoirs really hit a crisis. And I'm not talking about in 20 years. I'm talking about in the next 3 or 4 years. So we have a period of time here to change our use. There's a lot of pushing and shoving. The commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation said reduce by 2 to 4 million acre feet. That's what we need to do. And let's just talk about how the compact can allow that to happen. Well, again, it was an equitable apportionment, and I just want to graphically try to demonstrate that, right? You've got the upper basin and the lower basin, Colorado River between them, and originally that equitable apportionment was 50-50, right? It was 15 million acre feet assumed to be there. We added another 1.5 million from Mexico. Well, then on the main stem, what's actually happening between 2011 and 2022, so a kind of a good period of record, We've got about a 60-30 split. Just, you know, it's not 50-50. It's not living up to the original equitable apportionment. The use in the lower basin includes their evaporation and transit loss out of their big federal reservoirs. I'll get to that in more detail, but I want you to keep that in mind. And by the way, it's a 60-30 split with 10% going to Mexico, right? That's their 1.5 million that was guaranteed under the treaty. I'm going to focus primarily on the deal between the states because Mexico, while they've indicated that they're willing to deal with some shortages and they've been very accommodating, in their compact, in their treaty, they are entitled to 1.5 million acre feet. And that's a matter for our State Department and the International Boundary Water Commission to deal with, right? So it actually gets elevated up out of the 7 states and the Bureau of Reclamation, the Department of Interior. It becomes an international treaty issue. So just for this discussion, we'll talk about it as a static number. I would just indicate and nod to Mexico that they're actually very willing partners in figuring out how to make the river sustainable. So that 60-30 split means that we were using about 14.7 million acre feet of water during that period of time. And that was a time period where we might have been lucky if we were getting about 12 million acre feet in the river. So what happened? Oh yeah, those 2 big reservoirs are drained. We've now drained Blue Mesa. We're draining Flaming Gorge as we speak. And we have no plans for how we're going to handle this when those reservoirs are dry. So can't keep doing this, right? Water year 2021 was even worse. Upper basin use dropped to 3.5 million. It dropped primarily on the backs of our agricultural producers in the 4 upper basin states who flexed. And they did that because of the way we administer water in the state of Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico. The water either wasn't physically available at their head gates or it wasn't legally available because they had their head gates locked, right? So we used 3.5 in the water year 2021, and the upper basin continued to use more than their share on the main stem at 8.5. Mexico's use was still about 1.5. So I want to talk about possible future scenarios, right? What is it that the science is telling us today that we're not listening to? Well, a lot of the water policy folks will say we should plan for a 12 million acre foot river. That's what we've had over the last 20 years. So that's a good, let's plan the next operating guidelines to deal with 12 million. Well, 12 million, if we were so lucky to have that river at 12 million acre feet. And I want to say, what is a 12 million acre foot river, just to be clear when I talk about these numbers? That's a running 10-year average of what a river is flowing. What the natural flow would have been basically into Lake Powell if you took away all the upper basin depletions and you reconstructed that flow. It would be a 12 million acre foot flow, right? And so under that scenario, if we stuck with the 60-30 split, and I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting, certainly the River District and the state of Colorado are not in agreement with a cap on the upper basin, but if we were to stick with the current split, the 60-30 split, we'd end up with 3.15 million, and the lower basin would have to reduce by over 2.2 million, right? They'd come down to the 6.3. I have to say, though, that's not what the scientists are telling us to plan for. When we listen to the scientists today, they say plan for a 9 million acre foot river, right? That's incredibly scary, because even at 3 million up here and 6.3 million in the lower basin, that's huge economic disruption. That's communities suffering in all the basins. If we actually reduce it more, the pain and the creativity that's needed are going to be even more. So what does it look like if we listen to that 9 million acre foot discussion? Well, the upper basin is going to say, let's go back to that 50-50 deal here. Yeah, right? Like, we get 1.5 to Mexico, and that means there's 84% left. We get 50% of that. That's 3.75 million. That's more than we used in 2021. That's less than our average. We feel like that's pretty fair. I don't think anybody in the lower basin is going to agree to that, right? because they have huge population, huge demands. The idea that they could get by with 3.75 million is probably unrealistic. But that's not going to stop me from starting at that point, right? I mean, come on. So what about the lower basin? What do you think their starting point is on that discussion when we start talking about this going into the future? Well, that 60-30 split, I don't think they're going to even start there, because that would only give them about 4.5 million acre feet. Remember, they're using 8.5 this year. So that's a huge cut. But I would point out the idea that the upper basin states only get 30% or 2.25 million acre feet of water seems absurd to me and the rest of the folks in the upper basin. So that doesn't seem tenable either. But somewhere in between in those percentages is actually an equitable agreement. And so we've got this crisis just barreling down on us, and the question is, how do we take the first step? To her credit, the Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation and the Undersecretary of Interior, both of them said in June, you need to reduce 2 to 4 million acre feet to the states, and if you don't do that, we will do it for you, right? So how do we, the states didn't do it. Brennan talks about a 5-point plan in the upper basin. We tried. Hard to attach numbers to water conservation in the upper basin, mainly because it depends year over year on our hydrology. It depends on our input. We live with the hydrology up here. Down in the lower basin, they haven't lived with the hydrology since before the 1930s, because the Hoover Dam has allowed them a very reliable, solid supply of water. In fact, the current operating guidelines, let's just talk about that, in the formula that decides how much water is released from Lake Powell and Hoover, nowhere in that is the current hydrology factored in. If you want to talk about hubris and of man and woman in water planning, it is, we don't care what Mother Nature delivers. We've got reservoirs, and we're only going to pay attention to the levels in those giant reservoirs. Well, you know where that got us? 24% full in Powell and 23% full in Meade, approaching dead pool in both. It's not working. So we got to pay attention to the hydrology. So the other question is there something else we can do and should do before we start really seriously talking about how we contribute in the upper basin? Well, this graphic, I want to credit Marielle with this one. Sometimes it's hard to explain this weird concept, but in the upper basin, we have Lake Powell, the Flaming Gorge, Blue Mesa, and Navajo are large federal reservoirs. They're called the CRISP reservoirs, Colorado River Storage Project reservoirs. The evaporation off of all of those reservoirs gets attributed to the states, so that when we talk about the upper basin consuming 3.5 million acre feet, it includes every drop of water that all of us consume out of the river, plus the evaporative loss off of those reservoirs gets added into the water we actually consume. That makes sense, because it's a depletion from the system, and someone's got to own it and take it. And so that's part of our share of the river. In the lower basin, the way that was started to be accounted for back in the 60s came out right out after the Supreme Court, and keep in mind, down the lower basin, they never reached a compact. Now, this might sound familiar. They weren't able to agree, and they weren't able to figure out how to apportion water, and they weren't able to figure out how to reduce their water use. That's today. Well, back then, they weren't able to do it either. So they ran to the Supreme Court, Arizona v. California, 10 years of litigation in front of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court interpreted, and this is really important, the Boulder Canyon Project Act that authorized the building of the Hoover Dam. And it said, California, you get 4.4, Nevada, you get 2.8, or I'm sorry, Arizona, you get 2.8, and Nevada gets 300,000. That's, for lawyers in the crowd, that's 7.5 total. So that's it, 7.5. Well, the court decision doesn't address evaporation from Hoover, Mojave, and the other federally owned reservoirs down there, and it doesn't include the transit loss when say you know, I'm with Imperial Irrigation District, a couple hundred miles below Hoover, and I call up the Bureau office in Boulder, Nevada, and say, hey, let loose some of that water. I'd like 100,000 acre feet. The Bureau actually has to let out something like 120,000 acre feet, so they get 100,000 acre feet at their gate. And basically what they're doing down there is something called delivery accounting. They account for the water consumption only at the head gates. They miss the evaporative loss and they miss the transit loss. And the Bureau has been doing that since the 60s. And our state and others are on record back in the 70s, 80s, saying, no. Totally unfair, totally wrong. You're giving them more water than they're entitled to. And we are going to be injured one day. Well, that day has come, right? So now the Bureau of Reclamation in an unspecified demand says, all of you 7 states have to reduce your water. And I agree that we do, but this evaporative loss, along with the transit loss, amounts to an average of 1.2 million acre feet of water a year. And the lower basin doesn't get dinged with that. So they get their 7.5 plus another 1.2. It's like running 2 sets of books, right? It's the set you show to the IRS and the set you run in your own business, right? It's wrong. It's illegal in the context of the IRS. I'd say it's probably illegal in the context of the river. And so the Bureau has to fix this problem. Absolutely. And the Department of Interior has to do this. They don't want to do it because they've got great relations with the lower basin contractors. Frankly, it's going to cause significant pain in the lower basin to take 1.2 million out of the water they've been getting. I get that. But they need to fix that before we all start programmatically conserving water in the upper basin. We know we've got to do it, and we know that we need more than 1.2 million average per year, but this is a simple, equitable, does the word sound familiar? Equitable fix to the system. This is something the federal government must do right now. And they have the right to do it under the compact. They have the right to do it lawfully. They just don't want to do it because it hurts and it's going to maybe bring in litigation. So I just want to be clear from my perspective in the river districts, there very well may be litigation if they don't fix this problem from us. Because if their threat is to come after our federal projects in the upper basin, we will defend those projects. And it's really important to realize that. And it's not just the river district, it's all of our federal projects in Colorado, east and west slope, that are being put at risk by this demand. And you've got to fix that problem first. So remember, equitable apportionment, that's what it was, that's what it should be. We just have to figure out what equity means today, right? The question is here, what now? How do we fix this? These gentlemen are on a ditch here in our district looking at it saying, well, how in the heck, what do we do, right? Their system's broken, well, so is ours, right? Well, we all have to act in a way, once the Bureau fixes that accounting, we all have to find our fixes. Frankly, every one of us in this room, every one of us in the state of Colorado, in the basin, need to come to the table with solutions, right? Here's the solution to that problem. It might be a little easier than the Big River problem. But the reality is we've got ways to solve this. The River District has a small hand in this. We've been running our community funding partnership, trying to help our water users reduce their water use, become more efficient, keep more water in the streams, adapt to this changing climate. We need every water user in this state and in the basin to do the same. We can do it and live with the compact. We can be within the meaning of the compact if we follow those goals. And so the key here is getting the accounting fixed and then recognizing that we all have an obligation to participate as well. How does that work? We'll see in the future. There are lots of opportunities there for all of us. I want to thank you for listening, and I want to also just say I'm really looking forward to the next panel and hear how each one of these water user groups from lower and upper basin are prepared to participate in solving this problem. And that's why we brought them here. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. We're going to take a break now before our next panel. While we're on the break, we're going to play a little video about our community funding partnership. It's just a few minutes long, so feel free to stick around, but also get up, stretch, move your legs, and we'll be back for the Interstate panel.
For more than 80 years, the Colorado River District has been working to protect West Slope water and keep your water on the western slope.
Adapting to a hotter, drier future where there may be less water means that you need to have infrastructure that works properly.
Today, the Colorado River District continues that legacy with the creation of the Community Funding Partnership.
This is like a dream come true that this actually came to fruition. We wouldn't have done it without grant funding.
The Community Funding Partnership funds were key to making this happen.
Together, we're funding community-driven projects that benefit current and future generations on the western slope.
You know, still having opportunities for people to paddle down the river, having healthy agriculture.
It's critically important to an area like this. Having access to the funds that came through 7A last year gives the River District the ability to really help.
Healthy rivers, infrastructure, productive agriculture, watershed health and water quality, conservation and efficiency.
15 counties as diverse as Pitkin or Rio Blanco or Delta and Summit. These are hugely different areas with hugely different needs, but they all came together to realize that water is the most important thing we share on the western slope.
With the support of Western Colorado voters, partnership funding will provide a catalyst for water projects that benefit our communities, our economies, and our environment. Because the work we do today will define our communities tomorrow.
Hello, hello. All right, we're going to wrap up the break. If you wouldn't mind taking your seats again. And I just want to note, I know there were people standing around the edges and in the back. There are some empty seats up front. And if you're at one of the tables and you have an empty seat next to you, please raise your hand in case there's someone who needs a seat. Yeah, plenty of seats up front. Plenty of seats up here, back there. So those of you who are standing and do want to sit, please join us at the tables. All right, we'll give everyone a second to funnel back in. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm excited to introduce our first panel of the day, which will dive deeper into the issues and questions that both Andy and Brendan have queued up. And we'll get to hear directly from our lower and upper basin neighbors to get their perspectives on these big, important issues. Here to discuss how the renegotiation of the 2007 Interim Guidelines may impact water users, local communities, and states across the Colorado River Basin. Please welcome the following individuals. First, we have Peter Fleming, our General Counsel at the Colorado River District. He's going to be moderating this discussion. Peter has been the General Counsel at the District since 2002. He serves on the Upper Colorado River Commission's Legal Committee, and he frequently speaks on water, the Interstate Compact, and governmental issues. Next, we have J.B. Hanby, Imperial Irrigation District Board Director of Division 2 in California. Director Hamby is the Vice President of the IID Board of Directors representing Division 2, which includes El Centro, Heber, Sealy, and the West Mesa. He also serves on the Colorado River Board of California as the representative for IID and as the chairman of the Coachella Valley Energy Commission. Next, we have Steve Wolf, who's the Southwestern Water Conservation District General Manager, our sister organization in Southwest Colorado. Steve became the General Manager in June 2021. And the district is comprised of 9 counties covering Southwest Colorado. Bart Lieflang is the Colorado River Program Manager for Central Utah Water Conservancy District, where he manages in-kind contributions and provides technical support to the Colorado River Authority of Utah. Prior to joining CUWCD, Bart spent 11 years working for the Bureau of Reclamation in various capacities, including design, dam safety, and construction. And finally, we have Patrick Dent, who is the Central Arizona Project's Assistant General Manager over Water Policy. He joined CAP in 2000, serving in CAP's Water Operations Group. Patrick is responsible for long-range planning, policy analysis, development, and program implementation for the CAP service area, the Colorado River, and the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. Apologies if I missed any bio things from anyone. I assume you guys will fill people in on your own, but please welcome our wonderful panelists, and I'll kick it off to Peter.
Thank you for the introduction, Marielle, and I'm really excited about this panel. These 4 individuals have a great deal of expertise with on-the-ground water use and water policy in the basin. Literally, these are folks that will be at the forefront of renegotiation of the 2007 Interim Guidelines. They will be in the room when it happens. I also want to thank River District staff and our hosts here at Colorado Mesa University and the Grand Valley in general. It's always a really awesome time of the year to visit Grand Junction and the Grand Valley. It's beautiful. I had to do a double take this morning when I looked out the window and it was raining in the morning in the Grand Valley in September, no less. And it's still beautiful, makes it all the more beautiful. We will definitely take it. This panel is called the 2026 Interim Guidelines and Interstate Water User Discussion. And that might be a little bit of a misnomer because what we're operating on today is called the 2007 Interim Guidelines. Andy mentioned those, Brendan mentioned them briefly. I'm going to talk in just a minute in just a little bit more detail, set the stage about what the interim guidelines are. But those interim guidelines expire, and that's why in 2025, at the end of 2025 and in 2026, we'll be under a somewhat new regime under the river. Might they be interim guidelines as well? Probably will be 2026 interim guidelines. So that's the reason for the title of this discussion. I thought Andy teed up really well the issues on the river and the big picture sort of problem. Boy, we have, including Mexico and the million acre feet for the lower basin trib, 17.5 million acre feet of water allocated on paper within the basin. But if we only have a river that is producing 14, 13, 12, or even 9 million acre feet, as Andy indicated might be possible, what is the impact on that? And this panel is intended to give a little bit, bring that sort of big picture crisis down to the water user level. The person who represents water organizations that use significant amounts of water in the river, or that are responsible for representing water users within their respective districts, and also to talk about how each state that they live within and represent are looking forward to, or maybe with some trepidation, going into renegotiation of the interim guidelines. So a little bit of a primer on the interim guidelines themselves. Andy talked about sort of what we call the law of the river, the big river, and that's a sort of a term of art, and it basically means everything from the 1922 Colorado River Compact, proceeding throughout the years of all of the various other compacts, federal laws, United States Supreme Court decisions, and so forth that guide operations on the river. And if you look at the federal laws, you could start with the 1928 Boulder Canyon Project Act. That authorized Hoover Dam, which forms Lake Mead, also authorized the All-American Canal, which feeds the Imperial Irrigation District that Mr. Hamby works for. Then you have the 1956 Colorado River Storage Project Act, CRISP as it's known, which authorized the construction of Glen Canyon Dam, which forms Lake Powell, and the other initial CRISP units, which we have in Colorado, the Aspinall unit, which was originally known as the Curacanti unit, Navajo Reservoir, and Flaming Gorge. Then you have the 1968 Colorado River Basin Project Act. I wish they had come up with a name that wasn't quite so similar to the name of the 1956 Colorado River Storage Project Act, but so we often just refer to those as the 1956 and 1968 acts because their titles are so similar. The 68 Act authorized construction of the Central Arizona Project, which Mr. Dent works for, the beneficiary of that project, the Central Arizona Project Conservancy District, is it? Or yes, thank you. It also had some language in there that Andy alluded to about Arizona taking the junior priority within the lower basin. I'm sure Patrick has some views on that. But it also provided for the coordinated operations of Lakes Powell and Mead. And that is where we get into the 2007 interim guidelines, because it is that provision in the 1968 Act calling for the coordinated operations of Lakes Powell and Mead that was basically the federal legislation that authorizes various ways in which those reservoirs operate together. Now, those 2007 interim guidelines came on the heels of severe drought at the very beginning of this century, when the reservoirs were in a similar crisis situation, although today I believe they're quite a bit lower, especially when combined storage is taken into account. throughout the basin. And the 2007 interim guidelines are somewhat complicated, but in essence, they call for releases from Lake Powell based on respective elevation tiers in Lake Powell and Lake Mead. And they sort of, there's, rule lines by which if Lake Powell is above a certain level and Lake Mead is below a certain level, then you release 8.23 million acre feet from Lake Powell, just by way of example. And those releases in the guidelines range anywhere from 7 million acre feet to above 9 million acre feet on an average base, or on an annual basis. The thought going in was, you would strive for an average annual release of about 8.23 million acre feet. Just surprisingly, that's in quotes, that 8.23 is basically 7.5 million for the lower basin plus half of the Mexican treaty obligation. Doesn't say that's what it's supposed to be for, but it just happens to be, the math works out that way. That was intended to be the average. It actually has, since the 2007 interim guidelines were adopted, the annual average has been higher than that based on both hydrology and how the reservoir contents are driven. So one of the key points, though, and Andy made this point, and it's an important one, is that the guidelines themselves are driven and require releases solely based on the storage levels. They don't take into account what the natural flow is from any given year to the other. Now, obviously, what comes in is based on natural flow. But what's going out of the reservoir, out of Lake Powell, and into Lake Mead, which is downstream, of course, is not in the 07 guidelines. It's not based on hydrology. It's simply based on the storage levels in the respective reservoirs. Another key point I wanted to make is that despite the current crisis, and there is a crisis, it's real, it's here, it's at our doorstep, there's not a compact violation situation at present. There's no talk amongst the states or the federal government that this is a compact curtailment crisis. This is a crisis about water supply that is driven by the storage levels in these reservoirs. Remember, these reservoirs were constructed decades after the compact was signed. When the compact was signed in 1922, they didn't exist. So I'm going to wrap up here really quickly. But basically, I just wanted to sort of key up for our panelists here that given, despite we're moving into these negotiations for this post-2026 operations, I don't think that we can ignore what's happening on the river today. Andy mentioned the Secretary of the Interior's call for 2 to 4 million acre feet of consumption, of conserved consumption to come up with additional water to save this infrastructure. That's going to be necessary, not just on a one-time basis, by the way, annually, depending upon hydrology. And so as we go into the negotiations for guidelines that will sort of decide where the river is headed and operations are headed for another decade or two or more to come, how does the current state where we are today in this storage crisis drive those negotiations and drive the respective interests from their respective states, from their water user organizations, from their on-the-ground irrigation practices that they do. So with that, I believe we have a set order, and we're going to turn it over first to J.B. Hamby.
Thank you so much, Peter, and I'll do my best to let our junior user here on the slide order here have some time surplus left over at the end. for Mr. Dent. Yes, my name is J.B. Hamby. I'm a director on the Imperial Irrigation District Board of Directors. And this talk is mostly focused on 2026 and beyond, how we're going to operate the Colorado River. But at least from a California perspective, especially with the way things have been portrayed or not in the media, I think it's important to have some historical perspective, how we've gotten to this point, where we are today, and a little bit of discussion leading into the future. So in the beginning, a lot of the Colorado River development really occurred because of the early development of the Imperial Valley. The best book I've found on the history of the compact and the early development of the Colorado River is Norris Hundley's Water in the West. One of the first chapters is titled something along the lines of Imperial Leads the Crusade or Joins the Crusade. And historically, the Colorado River meandered over time at its delta, entering ultimately the Sea of Cortez, but sometimes it didn't. The Colorado River sometimes silted up its banks and then turned westward, ultimately into what would become the Imperial Valley, into the Salton Trough, and laying down layers of rich soils. All that empty space that's in the Grand Canyon today was basically carved out of the river, and those soils deposited over time in what is known today as the Imperial Valley. And what was seen at the time in the late 19th century is this would be a really great place to farm and be able to use water from the Colorado River, which was pretty much untapped at that point with, on the most part, most of the water was wasted, were the terms they used at the time, into the Sea of Cortez. But it was saw fit that the Imperial, what would become called the Imperial Valley, was known at the time as the Valley of Death or something like that. You can get the impression of why water is important to us. And there were claims at the time for about 10,000 CFS posted in a tin can or nailed on the tree or something like that, which works out to about 7.2 million acre feet per year. So they did start to deliver water to the Imperial Valley. The first delivery was in 1901, started where Yuma roughly is at, coursed down into Mexico, and then back up into the Imperial Valley because there's a large set of sand dunes called the Algodones sand dunes that they couldn't cut across that way. So they used some of the natural washes that then the water came back up into the Imperial Valley, and they started to irrigate lands there, ultimately becoming about 500,000 acres that was formerly desert and turned it into highly productive farmland early on. There was a private company, the California Development Company, that was put together at the time to develop this project. They ultimately went defunct after their battle with the Colorado River from 1905 to 07, when the Colorado River did what it did over time, overflowed its banks and started to course its way through the Imperial Valley, which had been settled at that time, and started to form what is known today as the Salton Sea. Historically had been known as Lake Cahuilla, as an intermittent lake that existed there. So after that company went defunct, trying to fight this battle with the river, which was caused by floods on the Colorado and the Gila rivers, the Imperial Irrigation District was formed by a public vote of the people of the Imperial Valley who lived there at the time. The flooding issue, which is something we don't really experience or think about today, was a big motivator for us. We needed really two things at the time. We needed a dam on the Colorado River, which ultimately would become the Hoover Dam, and then also a canal that would no longer go through Mexico, but what is called today the All-American Canal, because it flowed entirely through the United States, because during the time of Mexican Revolution, we would occasionally experience bodies or horses and other things that floated up, as well as our drinking and agricultural water supply. So the 1922 compact gave us that dam and gave us an all-American canal, at least it was pledged at that time, in exchange for the lower basin capping its use at 7.5 million acre feet per year. And the 1928 Boulder Canyon Project Act was written by a man named Phil Swing, who was formerly the IID Chief Counsel, General Counsel, who helped to form the Imperial Irrigation District, and then he became the congressman that ultimately authored that legislation. So a little bit about within that 7.5, you have 4.4 million acre feet of use in California, and that's split into 4 major users and a 5th semi-party in this equation. So the first is the Palo Verde Irrigation District. It's a strip of land with water right priority dates back to 1877. The next after that is the Yuma Project, which is a combination of the Quechan Indian tribe and the Barred Water District. This is on the California side, on the Colorado River, which defines the boundary between Arizona and California. That's priority 2. 3A is the Imperial Irrigation District. 3B is the Coachella Valley Water District, just to the north of us on the other side of the Salton Sea. Collectively, the agricultural users at the time when this priority system was defined was 3.85 million acre feet. The remainder would then go to the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, which today serves about 20 million people, and half of which its water supply is the Colorado River. So California did have senior water rights, but our rights were limited to 4.4 million acre feet, even though more could be used and was at the time. So this led to a number of things here, but one of the key motivating factors in where we are today is Arizona versus California. California, unfortunately, at least from a California perspective, lost that case. This led to the Colorado River Basin Project Act authorization, which built the Central Arizona Project, which Andy talked a little bit about. And the Central Arizona Project was built, adding some new demands on the river. Prior to this time, prior to this large canal going 400 miles uphill through the desert being constructed, California was using the water that Arizona did not at the time. California at some point was at its pinnacle using about 5.2 million acre feet per year, even though it was entitled and limited to 4.4 million acre feet per year. The extra 800,000 acre feet was being used in the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, stretching from San Diego all the way up to Ventura, and from LA all the way into the Inland Empire, building lots of houses that had very inflexible ability to reduce their use by 800,000 acre feet. So push came to shove in the early 2000s when drought and the continued drawdown of the reservoirs at this time occurred. And this yielded the 2003 Quantification Settlement Agreement, the QSA at the time. This reduced California's use from 5.2 million acre feet down to 4.4 million acre feet. This was a massive reduction for California. That was an 800,000 acre foot reduction that we've lived with for the last 20 or so years here. So this has been the nation's largest ag to urban water transfer, is how this reduction has been achieved. There's about 100,000 acre feet per year of water that goes from the Imperial Valley to the Coachella Valley Water District, another 100,000 that goes from Imperial Valley to the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and about another 280,000 acre feet that goes from the Imperial Valley to the San Diego County Water Authority, and then to settle some Native American water rights settlements that had not been resolved for a very long time. Each one is done differently. The metropolitan part is funded by some of the lower hanging fruit that existed at the time, pump back systems and canal lining, some other infrastructure improvements that have longer term benefit. The San Diego component is mostly done through, first it was a fallowing program, which was very harmful to the valley economically, which then transitioned to an on-farm efficiency conservation program by which all the expensive stuff to be able to farm more efficiently, drip and pipe and everything else that takes to do that, is invested by those other parties into that program. But in doing so, removing this amount of water from the Imperial Valley had consequences, not only economically, but also environmentally and ecologically at the Salton Sea. When that 500,000 acre feet was no longer being used for farming in Imperial Valley and instead going to other urban areas within Southern California, that reduced the volumes going to maintain the Salton Sea, which at this point had become a great place for birds to hang out because 95+% of the wetlands in California had disappeared and been developed either because of urban development or agricultural development throughout the rest of the state. So 400 varieties of birds like to hang out there, and then which became harder to do when there was less of a fish population in the Salton Sea with the rising salinity levels and less of a sea there geographically, and then also the shrinking of the Salton Sea has exposed lots of playa. Very similar situation in the Great Salt Lake as well. When you have high winds come through, whip up all that dust that's then breathed in by our residents who live in the Imperial Valley. But getting into the present, where we're at is these years into the Quantification Settlement Agreement, IID has moved 7 million acre feet since that time over the last 20 years through conservation of extraordinary measure from us to keep California within its entitlement. We've also had about 1 million acre feet of underruns, meaning water that we're entitled to, but that we just didn't use, and that ended up flowing down the priority chain to other users. The 2007 guidelines, a big component there is that the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California has banked about 1.5 million acre-feet of water into Lake Mead. That has helped stave off decline of the reservoirs and shortage conditions for a very long time. This would have happened a lot earlier had they not done that. And so getting to where we are with the June announcement, the three main components are that the system at this point is going to dead pool. The name of this conference is Overdrawn. That's what the river is. There needs to be a recognition that we have to collectively across the basin reduce our use. Otherwise, we're simply going to dead pool. And for us who live in the lower basin, Mexico, Imperial Valley, Coachella Valley, Palo Verde, the Yuma area, this is our only water supply. We have no other source of water. So if we get down to dead pool at Lake Mead, no water can physically pass through the dam. That means no water for any purposes, not M&I, nothing. There's no water available. So that's something that we don't want to see. So over this summer, California and our agencies have been working with Nevada and Arizona and the other basin states to try and develop plans to reach these ambitious stretch goals of 2 to 4 million acre-feet in 60 days. Unsurprisingly, given this whole history and the fact that the QSA, for instance, which was only 800,000 acre-feet, took 5 years to develop and then another 10 years to litigate it. So in this situation, we're still working to develop that plan in earnest. Presently, California is working its darndest to try and come up with a plan to leave millions of acre-feet over the next 4 years in Lake Mead to preserve the system, continuing to work with our colleagues in Arizona and Nevada in the lower basin and throughout the upper basin as well. But ultimately, from our perspective in California, the Salton Sea is going to be deeply impacted by this. The sea was already deeply impacted by the prior transfer arrangements. The state of California was 17 years late. They assumed the liability of the sea, by the way. 17 years to actually do anything. Now we're going to add some additional burdens onto the Salton Sea and the surrounding community. So fortunately, Reclamation and the state of California have been working very productively together on that. Usually the Salton Sea has been the impediment for a lot of things. Now it's really brought a lot of people together, and the recent legislation has been helpful for that. But overall, funding is a really big component to this. This was a very sobering thought, how to develop this volume of water without any funding to do it. Fortunately, the Senator Sinema, and using her 50th vote in the Senate, was able to get that $4 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act, so named, and that made a huge difference from June to when that legislation was already enacted, because it's easier to solve these big problems, which are very difficult when you have money in hand rather than without. It costs money to generate that water, to cover the cost, the third-party impacts, and to do that water conservation infrastructure at very large scales. So kind of moving into the future here, and I'll leave something left over for our friends at CAP to have here on the system, is that looking forward to 2026, is there going to be a reset of the river, at least from a California perspective? No. The compact provides us a lot of flexibility. It provides us the ability to reach consensus. It's not going to be easy, but there are ways that we can make this a better process. I think one of the things that made a big difference, although I think there's more to be done here, is having that congressional level support, the basin states working with each other, not just who's going to take the painful cuts, but how do we bring additional resources to bear in helping us make this transition, because it's going to be incredibly difficult and hard without it. In the long term, we have to balance the system. We cannot continue to draw out of the system more than the system provides, and we still need to have something left over for storage as well. And I think overall we need to have a perspective of being, we use the word collaboration a lot in the Colorado River Basin, and when push has come to shove recently with the recent announcements, that kind of went out the window for some, and finger pointing and posturing happened rather quickly. That doesn't really help. We need to generate wet water to protect the system and ultimately allow everybody to have something. We might all have to live with a little bit less so we can all have a river in perpetuity. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, JB. really great remarks. I wanted to note that Andy and I had dinner with JB and Patrick last night, and they were talking to each other then. So, next speaker is, maybe it was Andy's agitation that is going to make this more interesting, I hope. It often does. Next speaker is Steve Wolf for the Southwestern Conservation District, sister agency of the Colorado River District. Andy and I work very closely with Steve and Southwestern's General Counsel, Beth Van Verst. Before Steve took that position, he was with the Wyoming Interstate Stream Commission, something like that. Also on the engineering committee, and is the chair of the engineering committee of the Upper Colorado River Commission. And so I've worked with Steve for a long time in those capacities, and please help me welcome Steve.
Good morning, and thank you, and thanks to the River District for inviting me to be here this morning. As Peter said, my name's Steve Wolf. I'm General Manager for Southwestern Water District. For those that don't know Southwestern, we cover the part of the western slope that this river district doesn't cover, the Dolores and San Juan River basins. We were formed in 1941, just a few years after the River District, have the exact same mandates, just cover a little bit different to the state. The River District here is a lot bigger and has a lot more money than we have, but we're a lot more nimble than they are, so. Anyways, so my comments will, and again, before taking the job at Southwestern a little over a year ago, I worked for the state of Wyoming for a lot of years, primarily in interstate streams groups. I've been working on the Colorado River since 2005, so I've been through a lot of the things we've seen. A lot of my comments will probably duplicate or follow a lot of things Andy said. That's okay, that makes either both of us right or both of us wrong, I guess. I'm not sure which one. But sort of as a start, there's a really smart guy named Ken Curtis. Ken, you in the room somewhere? He was supposed to be here. Anyways, many know Ken, he runs the Dolores Project, right? Recently, he made a really profound statement. He says, all this discussion about the Colorado River doesn't matter. Ultimately, demand will equal supply, right? We all understand that. It's simple math, it's common sense, but it's an issue that sometimes seems to get lost in all the discussions and negotiations that go on. And I think that's sort of where we need to get to a place where we sort of fix that. At least understand that we are limited to the supplies that Mother Nature is going to provide us. And that means we're all going to have to take cuts. We're all going to have to suffer some pain at some level. And I think that's agriculture, that's municipal users, industrial users, the environment takes hits, recreation, all the above. But to begin with, and Andy sort of outlined this very, very well, is the more than 7.5 million acre feet that the lower basin currently uses from the system. I think that is something that needs to be fixed. That is nothing new. As Andy mentioned, it was discussed back in the 60s when the Arizona v. California, and we were talking about development of LROC, which was the old operating guidelines for the systems. It was discussed then. More recently, in June of 2013, in Santa Fe, at really what was the initial meeting to discuss drought contingency planning between Upper Basin and Lower Basin states, the Upper Basin put that as the prime negotiation topic, is Lower Basin, you've got to get down to 7.5 million acre feet. Not temporarily, not by storing it in Lake Mead to use later, but on a permanent basis. And I think that is a big first step, and I think for the Upper Basin users to be incentivized to use less water that might actually be available to them other than just the hydrologic decreases, that's got to happen first. So I think that's important. I think Andy mentioned that. And I think that's sort of one of the big first steps in reduced uses in the basin, the permanent reductions to that 7.5 downstream. So again, as we move forward, I think that's going to be important. I think anything that the new guidelines or whatever developed over the years, They've got to be flexible. And again, something Andy brought up. I don't think we need to change the compact. I think anything we need to do, we can do within the corners, within the framework of the existing compact. If we try and change the compact, it's hard, it probably won't happen, and you never know what's going to come out on the other side. So I certainly would argue against that, because I think everything we need to do and can do, we can do under the existing compact. We need operations criteria, again, like I said, that are flexible, whether we have a 12 million acre foot river, which we've seen for the last 20 years, or a 9 million acre foot river, or a 20 million acre foot river. We need some sort of criteria, some operation system that provides that divvies up the supply to the water users who need it. And we've got to remember, we still need to think about filling Lake Powell and Lake Mead, putting more water into them, so there's always a little chunk of water there. But again, any new document's got to have that flexibility. I know sort of the term being currently used is shortage sharing guidelines. That's kind of what we're looking at post-2026. There's a lot of smart people, both in the upper basin and lower basin, working on that concept right now. Looks a little different to different people, but Andy sort of outlined some of those numbers. They're hard numbers to get to, aren't they? To try and figure out what available water supply we might have. But we've got to figure out how we can do that across all sectors. And one thing at least I want to make a point about, and not get into details, is talk about tribal water rights. We haven't talked a lot about, though. There's a tribal panel this afternoon, but at least in Colorado, Colorado's two sovereign tribes, Ute, Mountain Ute, and Southern Ute, we share our water basins, our river basins with them. It's a really good thing that they have quantified water rights. A lot of tribes don't. But moving forward, the tribes in the basin have to be part of the discussion because of those water rights they hold. And in Southwest Colorado, I know that when we look at the tribal water rights, some have been put to use, some have not. How the tribes move forward in southern Colorado with their undeveloped water rights, two things can happen. They can impact existing water rights in Southwest Colorado, or they can benefit it. We would much rather see that second thing happen. Work with the water users, work with Southwest. We have undeveloped water rights as well, and come to a win-win solution on developing those water rights. We've started some of those initial conversations with Ute, Mountain Ute. We hope to start similar things with Southern Ute in coming times. But again, I think there are win-wins out there between water users, between environmental NGO groups and others. I think, again, we can't just point the fingers of blame, said, you know, you caused this, we caused this, whatever, because we've all been part of the river and working on it for 20 years. So all the decisions we made in the last 20 years have got us to where we're at. So we all have blame on that aspect. So again, we all have to work together to fix it. I think that's all the comments I'm going to have. Let the others go, and then hopefully we can have a good discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Great comments there. As we move forward through our speakers, I hope audience members are starting to think of some questions that they might ask of the panelists. Hopefully we'll have a good amount of time, because I know they all have a lot of knowledge, much more than they're just sharing with you from the podium here. One question I've already started thinking of, and frankly, when Andy was talking about it as well, is, and Steve just now, is this 1.2 million acre feet of transit and evaporative losses. You know, can you just, why don't you just, you know, account for that? And that gets us more than halfway to the lower end of the 2 million acre feet, and problem, you know, if not completely solved, a lot easier to solve. It sounds simple, and from the upper basin perspective, it makes a heck of a lot of sense. From the lower basin perspective, it might be a little bit or a little bit more difficult to accept that and to implement, you know, which would effectively be a 1.2 million acre foot cut in effect by stroke of a pen. If I were in the lower basin, I might say something, or if I represented the lower basin, I might say something like, Well, you know, the compact allocates the beneficial consumptive use of 7.5 million acre feet. And that's what we're doing. We're beneficially consuming 7.5 million acre feet, and that's what we're using. Yeah, you know, to get that water here, the losses and the evaporation, that's a consumption that is outside of our beneficial consumptive or beneficial use, and therefore, you know, we're not responsible for that. And the compact is clear that, you know, we get to consume beneficially 7.5 million acre feet. Of course, I'm thankful that I'm not in the lower basin, so I don't have to make that argument, but they might suggest something like that. Anyway, to move on, our next speaker is Bart Liefling with the Central Utah Water Conservancy District, which operates the Central Utah Project. Bart has two roles as well. He is an advisor or on contract of sorts to the Colorado River Authority of the state of Utah, which is a statewide or a state agency. So he serves a sort of two roles there. I haven't known Bart as long, but he is also on the engineering committee of the Upper Colorado River Commission. But it didn't take me long to realize that he's way smarter than me. So please welcome Bart. And I do believe Bart has a PowerPoint, so if the tech folks could get that loaded up, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. If you all will humor me, I drove out yesterday from the Wasatch Front, and I couldn't help but be inspired. It was evening as I drove past the San Rafael Swell, the Book Cliffs, the Manti La Salles, and the sun peeking through a little bit of an overcast sky and the long shadows and the colors, and then dropping into this Grand Valley. I was certainly inspired and struck by the magnitude of the job that we have to do, and certainly feel honored to have anything to do with this and to be here with all of you. I'm concerned about the river and looking for solutions. My first backpacking trip was at 7 years old on the Coyote Gulch in the Escalante River. Beautiful little canyon, huge red walls. They were really huge to me, especially at 7 years old. Grottos with springs and cascading falls. And at that time, at 7 years old, I had no idea what sort of convoluted fate that little stream in the water was wrapped up in. And here I am, you know, more than 30 years later, involved with it. And I think with my hat of Central Utah Water Conservancy District, there are lots of people out there that don't really understand the challenges on this river. And those of us that are involved with it have an obligation to that part of the community. You know, this 7-year-old Bart that had no idea but loved and enjoyed and drank the water that comes from this Colorado River. We have a tall order and I don't know if I can say a sacred duty and obligation in what we do here. With that said, I thought it would be helpful to give some background on Central Utah Water Conservancy District and the authority, Colorado River Authority of Utah. So up here on the map you can see the Colorado River Basin, and the yellow outline is the boundary for Central Utah Water Conservancy District. We cover about 8 counties. We supply water to over 1.5 million people. Now we're pretty small compared to a lot of what is handled in the lower basin, but in Utah, this is the primary population center for the state. It's very critical. We also, as you notice in that map, Central Utah covers, it's got its feet in 2 worlds, the ag world and Uinta Basin, and also on the Wasatch Front. So we have M&I and ag contracts as part of our operations. We collect water high in the Uintas on the Duchesne River tributary of the Colorado. It's a tributary to the Green that goes to the Colorado. And we can capture a drop of water at Upper Stillwater Reservoir way over on the right side, and that drop of water travels through pipes and tunnels and reservoirs. All by gravity, it can go 146 miles to 21st South, which is almost downtown Salt Lake City, all by gravity. It's an amazing system envisioned by engineers at the Bureau of Reclamation. They had some amazing foresight and vision, and it's a really impressive system. Where Central Utah is the contractor that operates this federal system. We have 5 high hazard dams, and the system was designed recognizing drought was going to be a big deal. So our biggest reservoir, Strawberry Reservoir, has a capacity of about 1.5 million acre, or 1.1 million acre feet, and you can see it there. I don't know how you would describe it, but it's not Utah Lake, it's the other one. So about 1.1 million acre feet, and we call that a 20-year reservoir. That's 20 years to cover drought, not necessarily aridification. And what we're facing now is very different. So we have a 500,000 acre foot perfected right. On average, we get about 160,000 acre feet of what we can collect and divert. We need more like 185 to be able to meet all of our contract commitments long term. In a year like 2021, we had a hydrologic short, and we only got about 41,000 acre feet. So if this is the trend, we certainly have, there's a major impact that we as an agency are facing in terms of being able to meet our contract commitments. So we certainly have significant interest in what happens on the Colorado River. We're also the most junior. We have a 1964 right, and as you consider what might happen coming down the road on the Colorado River, we care what happens at Central Utah. So with that said, the state legislature had some great foresight a couple of years ago and created this new Colorado River Authority of Utah. And because it's new, I thought I'd talk a little bit about it so that you're familiar with what it is. This is a statewide organization. It's an expansion of resources. The state recognized a need to spend more in being part of solution development and identifying solutions. We were lucky enough to hire Amy Hawes as executive director, who's just brilliant and does a wonderful job. It's governed, it has seven board members. One is appointed by the governor, one represents the Division of Water Resources, 4 represent water users, different portions of the state, and we had in this last legislative session the addition of a tribal seat, which we were thrilled about, and we've just recently learned of the appointment to that seat of Paul Sosi, who is an attorney from the Navajo Nation, and we're thrilled to have him joining the board. The mission of the Colorado River Authority of Utah is not dissimilar to the district, or to the River District and Southwestern, which is to conserve, use, and develop Utah's waters of the Colorado River system. One of the first things that we did was jump into developing a management plan. And we have that in place as of June, and we also put into place an annual work plan, which is very detailed, or more detailed for what we're doing on an annual basis. That plan specifically is focused on measurement, hydrology and operations, and drought mitigation. We recognize, especially on measurement, any solutions that we expect or hope to implement in the future really are going to be rooted in good measurement. We have to have good measurement. It protects everybody's interests by having good measurement. And we need more and better measurement. We're heavily focused in that and investing in improving measurement. So I have little kids, and for some reason I had just beyond the river bend in my head. So beyond the river bend, where are we looking? If you look at that map of the Colorado River Basin, and you think about our current situation, we're tapped out, right? It's a zero-sum game. If you think about Yuma, if they win, if we pull water there, someone else somewhere else in the basin wins or loses. If we approach things as a win-lose, in a win-lose approach, I have to say, in Utah, we really like salads in the middle of winter. And I think that probably holds true in Colorado. And I'm guessing that a lot of our salads in the winter come from Yuma. We all have legitimate defensible stakes in the river. And we really can't just sit and say, you know, I'm really happy that it's not my end of the boat that's sinking, because we're all in the same boat together, right? Nor can we bury our heads in the sand and hope that this issue goes away, because it's not going to. It's not going to go away. It's up to us to work on this collectively to find solutions. Now, what I want to point out is we really need to avoid past pitfalls. And honestly, I don't know that I could say it any better or differently than how Andy's articulated things, and Steve, in terms of some of the concerns that we have in Utah. But I do want to point out, and JB mentioned this, none of us benefit from a system that's collapsed or subject to collapse. It's not an option to let the system collapse. If we get to dead pool, IID gets no water, right? If we let the system collapse, we still have a commitment to ESA, right? There's a lot of stuff that has to be addressed, and we can't allow for an operating policy that allows the system to collapse. And it is our perspective that while the interim guidelines were designed with some specific hydrology in mind and an expectation for resets every couple of years, that it would recover the system and it would work, we don't believe that certainly with what we've experienced in the last 22 years and where things might go in the future, interim guidelines cannot support a system and keep it from collapsing. There are significant changes that need to be made, and we don't necessarily believe that within the framework of the interim guidelines that can be accomplished. What we do think is critical is that the future guidelines should be resilient and reliable. We believe they should be adaptable. And when I say adaptable, I don't think we should be guessing at what future hydrology might be. You know, I hear Brad Udall talk about 9 million acre feet. That might be it. And we might have some times where we have a lot more water in the system. We believe that the future policy should be essentially agnostic to hydrology. It should work under any hydrology. The system should be implementable. Right now, we determine operations in August based on some projection of what we might get in January and where we'll be. We think that's wrong. There's plenty of storage in the system. We should operate to what is in the bank and not what we hope to get in the bank. Sustainable. The system needs to be sustainable. And I know that that's kind of akin to adaptable, but we see them as slightly different. And equitable. And I know that the word equitable is fraught, and Andy and Steve have made great points on this. What I would say, and just I want to reiterate the fact that under current conventional thinking on the river, the upper basin carries the brunt of climate change and aridification. If you have a 11 or a 12 million acre foot river or a 10, and you consider the non-depletion obligation, there is a squeeze happening to the upper basin. And the question is that really equitable as it relates to the expectations of the the compact founders? Was that the intention, or was it the intention to have some equitable way of handling apportionment? And then the other thing I might ask is, the compact equitably split up water. Does it not also apply to shortage conditions? Can it not? We do believe that there's plenty of flexibility under the compact. We believe the compact is critical and crucial, and it is the tool that we need to use to collaborate amongst states and with the federal government to find the solution that we need post-2026. So that's that's our feeling on the question of flexibility in the compact. We have great opportunities and great challenges that we're facing. I'm certainly humbled and a little terrified to be part of it, but I appreciate the opportunity, and certainly we in Utah are doing what we can. The legislature has made huge commitments, $500 million in legislative actions committed towards water efficiency type things in Utah. We see the need for change, and Utah is moving that direction, and certainly Central Utah is along in lockstep with the state in doing those things, and that is what I have prepared. Thank you.
Well, I told you Bart was a lot smarter than I am. Really great comments, Bart. Personally, I think we should stick Bart in an office for a week and a half and come out with the solution, and just, that should be the law of the land. Really good comments. I would reiterate again, though, that this, we all need to, we're all in the same boat. We all need to deal with this, and there's got to be some sharing of shortage. The sharing of the shortage is going to be potentially painful. It's going to cost a lot of money because people have vested property rights that you have to compensate them for if they're not going to use those the water rights, for whatever purpose, growing crops or industry or municipalities. But let's be frank about it, it's probably mostly agriculture. In the Central Arizona project, which has a whole host of different types of water uses among its constituents and customers, they are already reducing their water supply under the 2007 Interim Guidelines. As I think Brendan mentioned, we're in declared shortages under the Interim Guidelines today, and Arizona is bearing the brunt of those based on the negotiations that took place in 2007 and some subsequent negotiations as well. But I will let Patrick Dent speak about that more. He knows obviously a lot more about the Central Arizona project and its operations than I do. I would say that Patrick is what I learned last night at dinner is that he can go toe-to-toe with Dave Kanzer from the River District on talking about baseball and the Red Sox, and anybody who can do that deserves some kudos. So please welcome Patrick.
Thank you, Peter. That was a very pleasant introduction, and I do support the Red Sox, but I'm pretty upset about the trading off a catcher this year. I am really grateful to be here today. I enjoy coming to the West Slope and Grand Junction. I do have family connections here. I married a woman who graduated from Fruita High School. Spouse is a pretty close connection. Her family, her father worked on the railroad here in Junction, and her mother's family really come from long-term ranching families, including the Paradox Valley in southeastern Colorado or southwestern Colorado, and then Canyonlands in the Bluff area in southwestern Utah. And so I enjoy coming, and I have instructions to take the white shirt I'm wearing now and carefully wrap some Palisade peaches in it and put it in my carry-on for when I return back to Phoenix. So I'm grateful to be here. I would also acknowledge the time and effort that Andy's district has put in to creating the symposium today. I think these conversations are really important at this time in the history on the river. I've worked in the salinity control program for a number of years, and so there are a few friendly faces in the room to me. There's some other faces in the room that I'm not going to comment any more than that. But I certainly would like to acknowledge that folks who have taken time, who are either on city councils or irrigation boards or are agricultural users, taken some time today to come and talk about the serious situation on the Colorado River that needs our attention is an important thing to do. And I hope I can add to that. I hope I can share a little bit about our perspectives in Central Arizona and what we're doing to address the river. I've heard everyone else's comments. It's nice to go last if they leave you some time. And I didn't even ask Peter how much I have. I got a bunch of stuff I want to convey, and we're going to take that time to do so. But I wanted to just make the point that of the marks that I came to prepare to say was just this acknowledgement that already all the speakers have talked about, which is we do have a broad issue in the basin. It is going to require commitment from all water users. The Central Arizona project is a part of that, and we're all a part of that. And so while water managers in the basin, of which I am one of, have a very specific role, and part of that I think has helped to get us into the space to act. In addition to that, there's a tremendous amount of work that has to be done by water users in local communities and in big metropolises across the basin to move us to where we need to go. So I'm here to help with my part of the dialogue, but I would absolutely acknowledge that not just the other gentlemen on the stage with me here today, but all of you in the audience, if you're here and you care about what we're talking about, you know we're in a serious place and we all have a role to play. So I did get asked to share a little bit about Central Arizona project reductions. They've been talked a little bit about already today, so I'm going to kind of move quickly so I can get to maybe some more current perspectives on the protection volumes that are needed and the discussion among the basin states. But Tier 1 shortage 2022, that is something that was first declared in 2021. The largest component of that really fell to Arizona. Practically all of that water reduction fell to water users within the Central Arizona project. The graphic I've got there behind me, I really wanted to just direct your attention to the circles on the side. Like lots of other things in water, the contracts within the Central Arizona project system can be complex. They get evolved over time, and there's a lot of kind of unique interdependencies, particularly when you want to understand what water user might be affected by a reduction. Typically, within the basin, I would say where the doctrine of prior appropriation has kind of been the prevailing water right sort of hierarchy. High priority agriculture usually has those longer, more historic rights. Within the Central Arizona project, it's actually inverted. Agriculture had CAP contracts when the project was first allocated in the 80s as part of working through the repayment with the federal government for the Central Arizona project and the federal government's role in addressing tribal water claims within Central Arizona. Those ag districts essentially relinquished their priority contracts within the CAP system and relied on any excess water that would be available for use in the Central Arizona project after those met. Those ag users, prior to having access to Central Arizona project water in Central Arizona, relied exclusively on groundwater. And a big purpose of the project was to conserve the groundwater that was being used. It's not a renewable resource. It's ancient in nature, and once used, it'll be in large part gone. And so the Central Arizona project was in part to bring initially water that was renewable to conserve that groundwater resource. In terms of 2022 shortages, most of all, I only say most, all of the water that was available to those agricultural districts, with the exception of some water sharing agreements that were put in place, was no longer available to them. The result of that has been is a return to groundwater pumping, where groundwater pumping can still provide access to their lands, but there are substantive lands that have just gone fallow in central Arizona because there's not a water supply there for agriculture. That may affect your individual farm in a fairly significant way, and I know that some farmers have chosen to close down their enterprises. Others are dramatically affected by the loss of Colorado River water. Also reduced, there had been water that Arizona, on behalf of the state and the project, had been banking because of CAP's junior priority status. Frankly, in 2015, most of those efforts had been reduced already, so when the shortage was implemented, that was the first to go, followed largely by agriculture. So here is a table of all the little itty-bitty numbers associated with the guidelines and DCP. There's only a couple numbers that I wanted to pick off there. This is for looking at 2023. This is the total reductions in the lower basin and Mexico that are required by the interim guidelines and the drought contingency plan. You can see the total. I don't know if the little arrow is, oh, it's not. I'm doing it here like you guys can see something and it's imaginary. I'll stop. In total, there's about a 720,000 acre-foot reduction for all lower basin water users that's mandated by those programs. The bulk of that, as you can see, is 592,000 acre-feet that needs to come from Arizona. Again, functionally, all of that is coming from the Central Arizona project. So going back to kind of the same chart for what it looks like next year, of course, all of the agricultural uses will be reduced, and then there will start to be dips into municipal and tribal contracts associated with those. That water is currently has a use, and those uses will have to be curtailed associated with the shortage declaration. A little bit about through time, and I think this is helpful. I believe either Peter mentioned or maybe Bart mentioned that Arizona had been reducing from its full entitlement for a number of years now. I thought I would bring the data. I don't want to go through the numbers with the group today, but I presume my slides end up in your packet, and I thought they might be a good reference material. But starting back in 2015, CAP, along with other lower basin water users, started implementing a number of programs to implement water use. Some of those are system conservation programs, which is water that's placed in Lake Mead and left there to be in the system. Other those are what they call ICS programs, or intentionally created conservation, that goes into the reservoir but then can be withdrawn at another time under certain rules and conditions. Of the water in this particular blue chart, about 75% of it fell in the first category, under a system conservation category, and the other 25% was under an ICS sort of condition. I have broken out in the shaded bars on the chart kind of the differences between the Central Arizona project and Arizona on-river users that have contributed to the system. There has been more on-river contribution in more recent years. Some of that from higher priority agriculture, non-tribal on the Colorado River, but frankly the bulk of it has been from the Colorado River Indian tribes participating in the drought contingency plan and continuing to enter into system conservation agreements to put their high priority water back in the Colorado River system. You'll see by the magnitude of the graph, in 2022 we are expected to get just about to 800,000 acre feet of a total reduction. That's a significant portion from Arizona's 2.8 million acre feet entitlement. And we're actually still working on 2022. At my board meeting 10 days or so ago, we took together another set of agreements where the city of Phoenix, the city of Tucson, I believe ASARCO, which is a mining company, and the city of Peoria have adjusted their water use patterns within 2022, and even between now and the end of the year are going to leave some additional water in the system. So I haven't included that in the numbers here today because we don't have the agreement signed, but we have found funding and moved forward with those items. So that's kind of what we're doing, the magnitude of water that we've left behind. I had one more little statistic about that, which was the role of tribal participation in Arizona. That's been mentioned a couple of times today. We don't have a tribal representative speaking on this particular panel, but I did want to certainly highlight the role of tribes in the conservation efforts within Central Arizona. We have 11 tribes that are serviced by the Central Arizona Project, 22 tribes within the state of Arizona. Some of those have resolved claims, some of those do not. But of the water that has been left in Lake Mead that you see in this chart, about 40%, I only did it on my calculator before I came up here, but it's in the 25 to 30% range of the water that was left behind was contributed by tribal entities. So we appreciate their support, and we appreciate them being a part of the dialogue and conversation in the state of Arizona and helping us do what we need to be done. I'm going to pivot now briefly to the protection volumes. I realize I've probably taken more than my time already, so I'm going to continue to speak a little bit quickly. But when the commissioner made her announcement about the substantive amount of reductions that need to be identified in the Colorado River Basin, frankly, in the near term, next year, certainly the one after, we immediately went to our water users. We understand that we're a junior priority water user in the lower basin. And while our planning envelope for more than a decade now has been around the Tier 3 reduction plus DCP, we talked about the very difficult discussion that we were going to have to begin to identify ways where CAP water uses might be reduced even further. Today it's been talked about quite a bit that EVAP and losses might be a good tool to use. I think it's the position of our organization that in fact that may be a great tool for reclamation to use that will find a relatively equitable distribution in the lower basin. Not all water users have that perspective, but at CAP we would be supportive along with the upper basin states and for reclamation to find a way to implement those sorts of reductions. If we did that on the Central Arizona Project users, those would still be in addition to the shortage provisions we have in place. So with a Tier 3 reduction, half of the CAP water supply is already reduced. If we took on just an additional system uses and losses, there's another several 100,000 acre feet that we would need to reduce to implement that. So I would echo, I think, both Andy and Peter's points that those are, while good ideas and things that we should work toward, they will be difficult to achieve. So I'm going to skip right to the end of my comments. I think in the moment right now, there are a few things that we should be working on in terms of moving forward with voluntary, the protection volumes that others have talked about today. I think most folks in the room that on the 16th of August, we announced a Tier 2A shortage. It didn't include additional reductions in the lower basin related to what the commissioner had talked about earlier in the summer. The plan was not fully developed. That work and that discussion was ongoing. The Inflation Reduction Act set aside a chunk of money for us to work on those things, and JB talked about how in California they're having discussions between them and Reclamation about how to address key issues for them and how to find ways to conserve water in his particular district. In terms of moving forward in the very near term, I have a couple of I think important things that we need to think about. First, it is fantastic that money was set aside. But it's a resource, and it's not a limitless resource. And we need to not squander both the time, storage, and funds that we have in the next couple of years to find a solution. Our perspective is voluntary, compensated, temporary types of activities do not get us all the way to finding a solution. And we need to find ways to implement permanent reductions. I don't think my comment is meant to say that we retire people's long-term water rights, but we do need to find a way to have more enduring conversations about how to permanently restructure how water uses occur in the lower basin. And this money and this time shouldn't be squandered in that offense. We need the feds to set a framework by where we can accomplish that. And we're hopeful that they'll continue to do so in the very near term. We need engagement with Mexico. I noted on Andy's slides, he still had 1.5. They are taking reductions under the interim guidelines and under DCP. We need to continue to have a dialogue with Mexico, and they need to participate in a commensurate way with the United States water users. That dialogue is an important part in us finding balance. And then lastly, and I think it goes along with the main message that we have here today, there really needs to be a bit of a hearts and minds sort of conversation about our water use. Andy, I think, conveyed that all water users need to be a part of that. I think that's a really hard place to get to. I know that we've had some difficult conversations already that haven't yielded solutions that I think that people in this room are concerned about. We'll continue to have those dialogues. But I do take some specific issue with the sentiment that's been shared today that there's a quid pro quo associated with what some other water user might need to do. If we think it's all of us and we think time's short and we think resources are minimal, then we need to find a way to move forward as quickly as we can, and we can't necessarily stand on the side and say, I'll go after somebody else goes. So those are my thoughts. I'm sorry I started talking fast and loud. I meant to be calm all the way through. I do appreciate it. I hope my exuberance has communicated how serious I think the situation is. I know that my organization takes it seriously. We are working hard to find a way to find balance in this system. I know others are as well. I don't mean to stand here and disparage anyone's position or efforts, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak. And Peter, I apologize for taking a little too much of the panel's time.
Thank you, Patrick. Again, great comments from all of our panelists. Really appreciate their thoughts. I think we do have some time, maybe 10 minutes. Somebody's saying 5, somebody's saying 10. I'm going to go with 10 because we'll push it just a little bit. You can give me the when we really do need to end. I'm sort of struck with two thoughts based on a lot of what we've heard today. And one of those is, the compact is still there. It's still inviolate, and we're not going to renegotiate the compact. On the other hand, I appreciated Patrick's comments about we actually need to talk about permanent reductions in use. The temporary reductions aren't going to cut it anymore for a while. When we do things like the 2007 Interim Guidelines, the 2019 Drought Contingency Plan, we come up with ways to dance around the compact and make what we're doing that might not be entirely consistent with the compact fit within the parameters of the compact. And so I'm wondering, how much can the compact bend in order to face the reality on the river today and going forward in post-2026? How much can it bend without breaking? The other thing is the recognition that that retirement of use is going to take a lot of money, and that there has been a lot of federal money appropriated, specifically targeted towards solving this problem. Now, how do we spend that money as a country, as a region, as states, as water user organizations, to best compensate the private property interests at stake, protect the local communities that are at stake from the downsides of a reduction in their production in their local community, and prevent private drought profiteering that could come associated with that large influx of money. So I've said my piece. I'm going to probably stand here because I can't see the whole audience from seated in this chair back here, and open it up for questions from the audience. I see one way in the back. That's Diane. Is that Diane? No. No, okay. Yes, Paula. So if I can summarize the question just in the interest of time, and Paula, correct me if I'm get it wrong, but Paula represents the Middle Colorado River Watershed Partnership here in Colorado, and is working with the city of Glenwood Springs. The question concerned about protecting the resource from outside threats in addition to just conserving the water, but protecting it from potential catastrophic threats of, and the example that was given was the possible transport of hot waxy crude oil going along the river corridor for a number of miles, including through the area that Paula represents. And so as we look both historically and in the future, how would the panelists address outside threats, environmental or otherwise, to the river?
Five minutes. I guess that it's almost like it's two conversations. I certainly agree that protecting the environment and the system we've got is important, but it's outside the conversation right now of trying to keep the infrastructure of the system whole, in my mind. Not that I want to diminish the question or the issue, because it's important, but it's a little outside of what we're trying to do right now at this point.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's only so much that you can tackle when you're handling one side of the equation, but if you've protected the ability and come up with how you're going to share shortages, but that all of a sudden an outside impact causes a catastrophe that you can't share in the amount that you've allocated, you've got another problem to deal with. So thank you for the good question. Any other questions? Yes. Ken. Yes.
reservoir levels in Powell and Meade? And then also, second part is, are you prepared for a deficit of that magnitude? Thank you.
So I think right now we don't have to prepare for that deficit. We're living the deficit, and why it's important to your first question there to protect those elevations. For us, at least many of the users, and we're one of the last stops on the Colorado River, and if you don't pass any water past Hoover Dam, you lose half of urban Southern California's water supply. IID goes to zero. We have no groundwater, no other supplies. Yuma has no water. Mexico loses all of their water. So certainly for us, if we want to have any water at all, any drops that come out of our taps, not even talking about agriculture and our rest of our economy, we have to get out of this deficit situation and get to a point that the system is balancing. And then in the long term, have some extra stuff in there for storage to buoy us through these ups and downs. But to your question, I think absolutely for those of us who are completely dependent on the Colorado River, have no other options, the deficit in the long run and in the short run has to be resolved.
Thank you, JB. And thank you, Ken, for the question. Other questions? Yes. Ken Curtis.
Yes, Ken from Dolores Water. I guess I'd like the panel or Bart to pick up on his comments We don't want to repeat mistakes of the past, but we also want to come up with something that deals with all hydrologic cases. So would the panel care to speculate on why we did that in the past and what it might look like in the future to have this variable hydrology, both dry and occasional excess, and how the various sectors might deal with that?
I'll start and not others. I think, Ken, part of the problem is we've been in this mindset, I heard it today, that, oh, we're going to get a wet year next year, we're going to be okay. We've had this mindset that the hydrology is going to come back, and it hasn't. And it's, let's face it, it's probably not. We are living on a 9 to 10 million acre foot river. So I think understand that piece and then design the decision-making system, as Bart outlined, to be able to incorporate a 9 million acre foot river, or 11, or even a 20 if we do get that in 1 year. It's got to have that flexibility built into it for those decisions.
Clearly, I don't know how to use these. Ken, thanks for the question. Maybe to give it a specific example of one way to do this in our perspective would be, first of all, we've got to remove an element of coordinated operations, which is that releases are dictated based on some elevation differential. And rather than looking at that, maybe look at total combined storage of the system and determine releases based on the condition of the system, rather than, and I know we've talked about this in terms of elevations, but if we make operational decisions based on, say, total combined storage, we remove the incentive of poor operations that increases differentials between reservoirs. So it properly places incentives, and it also allows us then to operate according to the actual condition. And storage is really a reflection of, it's a memory of hydrology. So it's really a function of hydrology when you make decisions based on storage. It's also something we can look backwards and be, we know if we operate according to what we know we have, we avoid some of the pitfalls that we've had under the current operating policy. I wasn't around in 05, 06, 07. I can't speculate on why it was designed the way it was, but there was an expectation that we would have resetting events every couple of years to the tune of 13.5+ million acre feet, and we haven't gotten that, and that's landed us where we are. If we operate according to, let's say, storage, we are able to eliminate some of the issues that are introduced under interim guidelines. And also, if you do that, then you don't have to worry about what elevation or what sort of hydrology you're getting. It's dictated by the condition in the reservoir. So if you end up with a 9 million acre foot reservoir and we've agreed to some sort of shared shortage, we don't have to wonder what we're going to do. We're able to determine the best way to operate according to preserving, to keeping the system from collapsing, and do it just based on storage. And that's, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's one thought.
Can I, my microphone works. I was around in 2007 and would suggest that, at that time when we set the guidelines, we did it on observed historical hydrology. And the observed historical hydrology in 2004 and 2005 supported the policy we implemented at the time. By 2012, we were back looking at it again, created the drought contingency plan, and here we are on the lower end of those historic outcomes, understanding that the smallest amount of risk really ended up being where we were. I acknowledge where Bart's headed in terms of we do have new things that we need to think about in terms of the guidelines and the operating rules, but frankly, fundamental to that, I think, is a question in front of us: how do we reframe our use if in alignment with our supply, particularly with regard to some of Andy's comments where we're not talking about augmenting the river right now, and we know we're not going to do it in 5 years, even if we did it in 20. It's really about getting our use back in alignment with our supply. And then we'll develop operating rules around that paradigm that hopefully leave enough certainty in the reservoir. We all feel good about storage because it's there and it's water we know we can use. I think I'm nodding to Bart's comment about that, about taking from a bank instead of an anticipated runoff. And so I think those are good places to be, but the first step is to get our uses aligned.
So what plans are being made for a 9 million acre foot river?
The question was what plans are being made for a 9 million acre foot river, if that is the average annual flow we're going to end up with.
JB, I'll take it too.
I think the honest answer is right now there is no plans. I think the problem we've been experiencing over the past while, look at this in a historical context. So we started around 2000, there was a surplus guidelines. We were dividing up water that was thought to be there. A few years later, there's 07, that tided people over until DCP, which kicked in and took a while to negotiate, happened in 2019. Then there was a 500 plus plan because DCP wasn't enough. Then you have what we're in now, which has come up with 2 to 4 million acre feet, which is not even down to 9. So we continue to deal with these dumpster fires that come up repeatedly, but I think the general point that I think is shared here is that we have to look in the long term and live with what the system provides to us. The supply and demand has to equalize. Right now, the general sentiment basin-wide is dealing with the dumpster fires at present, and we really need to get moving forward to 2026, which is the whole point of where we should be talking right now. Unfortunately, that's not where the basin is collectively.
Patrick, did you have?
Just a quick comment. It's the same answer I gave before about recalibrating our use. In terms of plans that I think need to be put together, the basin state does have, the water managers in the states have responsibility to create operating criteria. We have some difficult conversations about how at broad levels reductions are going to be implemented to conform with our supply. But I would also suggest that any water user in this basin needs to be making a plan how to use 20 to 30% less water. And that's really the core of the plan we need. And if you're of a mind that I need to wait and see what somebody else's plan, so they'll do something and I don't have to, I'm here to dissuade you of that notion. We need to find a way to get a reduction of about that much water basin-wide. And that's really the plan that matters. And I think that happens as much at the water user level as it does at the basin states and federal level.
Well, go ahead, Bart.
I was just going to say, I agree with Patrick. And the one thing I would say is we don't want to be putting out dumpster fires all the time. We've got to get past that. We've got to get to a place where there's reliability and consistency in how we operate. And certainly that's going to be in bringing our use and supply into balance. And I couldn't agree more. There was one question, a thought of, what would we do if we were in the shoes of the other panelists? And I would say exactly what Patrick said. We all need to be thinking about how we can handle our supply. And if you're a senior water right holder or a junior, it's gonna touch you no matter what. The basin, we're all connected. We really are.
Well, I was...
Thanks for being nicer than me, Bart.
Yeah. I was going to say, that here in the Upper Basin and in Colorado and the West Slope specifically, we're so fair and so equitable that we let Patrick have the last word. But since Bart largely agreed with Patrick, then I think we're okay with Bart having the last word. We've gone over quite a bit of time. I apologize for that. And I appreciate so much the words from our panelists, and I hope everybody joins me in thanking them for their contribution.
All
right, thank you all so much. That was a lot to digest, which means we're at lunch. So we're gonna open up these partitions over here. Lunch is to the side. We have some sandwich bar and other options for you. If you could all just take a few minutes, I know we're running a little short on time, but grab your lunch, come back to your seats, and then we'll start up our lunchtime keynote. So go grab lunch and we'll see you back in just a minute.